Good evening. Tonight's story is the fabulous adventure of Daniel O'Rourke, as presented by T. Crofton Croker. This story was first published in 1825 in Croker's Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland. It is perhaps fitting that this is an Irish story, since the weather has been exceptionally wet this month, and the sound of rain on this recording may be inevitable. I hope it creates a soothing ambiance rather than an annoying distraction. So now, let's open our imaginations and begin. People may have heard of the renowned adventures of Daniel O'Rourke, but how few are there who know that the cause of all his perils above and below was neither more nor less than his having slept under the walls of the Pooka's tower. I knew the man well. He lived at the bottom of Hungry Hill, just at the right-hand side of the road as you go toward Bantry. An old man was he at the time he told me the story, with grey hair and a red nose, and it was on the 25th of June, 1813, that I heard it from his own lips, as he sat smoking his pipe under the old poplar tree on as fine an evening as ever shone from the sky. I was going to visit the caves in Dursey Island, having spent the morning at Glengariff. "I'm often asked to tell it, sir," said he, "so that this is not the first time. The master's son, you see, had come from beyond foreign parts in France and Spain, as young gentlemen used to go before Bonaparte or any such was heard of, and, sure enough, there was a dinner given to all the people on the ground, gentle and simple, high and low, rich and poor. The old gentlemen were the gentlemen, after all, saving your honour's presence. They'd swear at a body a little, to be sure, and maybe give one a cut of the whip now and then, but we were no losers by it in the end. And they were so easy and civil, and kept such rattling houses, and thousands of welcomes, and there was no grinding for rent, and there was hardly a tenant on the estate that didn't taste of his landlord's bounty often and often in a year. But now it's another thing. No matter for that, sir, for I'd better be telling you my story. Well, we had everything of the best, and plenty of it, and we ate, and we drank, and we danced, and the young master, by the same token, danced with Peggy Barry from the Bohereen. A lovely young couple they were, though they are both low enough now. To make a long story short, I got, as a body may say, the same thing as tipsy almost, for I can't remember ever at all, no ways, how it was I left the place, only I did leave it, that's certain. Well, I thought, for all that, in myself, I'd just step to Molly Cronahan's, the fairy woman, to speak a word about the bracket heifer that was bewitched. And so, as I was crossing the stepping stone to the ford of Ballyashernaw, and was looking up at the stars and blessing myself, for why? It was Lady Day, I missed my foot, and souse I fell into the water. Death alive, thought I, I'll be drowned now. However, I began swimming, away for dear life, till at last I got ashore, somehow or other, but never the one of me can tell how, upon a desolate island. I wandered and wandered about there, without knowing where I wandered, until at last I got into a big bog. The moon was shining bright as day, or your fair lady's eyes, sir, with your pardon for mentioning her, and I looked east and west, north and south, and every way, and nothing did I see but bog, bog, bog. I could never find out how I got into it, and my heart grew cold with fear, for sure and certain I was that it would be my burying place. So I sat upon a stone, which, as good luck would have it, was close by me, and I began to scratch my head and sing the Ulligan, when all of a sudden the moon grew black, and I looked up and saw something for all the world as if it was moving down between me and it, and I could not tell what it was. Down it came with a pounce and looked me full in the face, and what was it but an eagle, as fine a one as ever flew from the kingdom of Kerry. So he looked at me in the face, and he says to me, "Daniel O'Rourke," says he, "how do you do?" "Very well, thank you, sir," says I. "I hope you're well," wondering out of my senses all the time how an eagle came to speak like a Christian. "What brings you here, Dan?" says he. "Nothing at all," says I. only I wish I was safe home again." "Is it out of the island you want to go, Dan?" says he. "It is, sir," says I. So I up and told him how I'd taken a drop too much and fell into the water, how I swam to the island, and how I got into the bog and did not know my way out of it. "Dan," says he, after a minute's thought, "though it's very improper of you to get drunk on a Lady Day, yet as you are a decent sober man who tends mass well, and never flings stones at me or mine, nor cries out after one in the field, my life for yours," says he. "So get up on my back and grip me well for fear you'll fall off, and I'll fly you out of the bog." "I'm afraid," says I, "your honour's making game of me, for who ever heard of riding a horseback on an eagle before?" "'Pon the honour of a gentleman," says he, putting his right foot on his breast, "I'm quite in earnest, and so now either take my offer or starve in the bog. Besides, I see that your weight is sinking the stone." It was true enough as he said, for I found the stone every minute going from under me. I had no choice, so, thinks I to myself, faint heart never won fair lady, and this is fair persuadance. "I thank your honour," says I, "for the loan of your civility, and I'll take your kind offer." I therefore mounted on the back of the eagle and held him tight enough by the throat, and up he flew in the air like a lark. Little I knew the trick he was going to serve me. Up, 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 God knows how far he flew. "Why then," said I to him, thinking he didn't know the right road home, very civilly, because, why, I was in his power entirely. "Sir," says I, "please your honour's glory, and with a humble submission to your better judgment, if you'd fly down a bit. You're just now over my cabin, and I could be put down there, and many thanks to your worship." "Aha, Dan," says he, "do you think me a fool? Look down in the next field, and don't you see 2 men and a gun? By my word, it would be no joke to shoot this way to oblige a drunken blackguard that I picked up off a cold stone in a bog." "Bother you," says I to myself, but I did not speak out, for where was the use? Well, sir, up he kept flying, flying, and I asking him every minute to fly down, and all to no use. "Where in the world are you going, sir?" says I to him. "Hold your tongue, Dan," says he, "and mind your own business, and don't be interfering with the business of other people." "Faith, this is my business, I think," says I. "Be quiet, Dan," says he. So I said no more. At last, where should we come to but to the moon itself? Now, you can't see it from this, but there is, or was in my time, a reaping hook sticking out of the side of the moon this way, drawing the figure thus on the ground with the end of his stick. "Dan," says the eagle, "I'm tired with this long fly. I had no notion 'twas so far." "And my lord, sir," says I, "who in the world asked you to fly so far? Was it I? Did not I beg and pray and beseech you to stop half an hour ago?" "It's no use talking, Dan," said he. "I'm tired bad enough, so you must get off and sit down on the moon till I rest myself." "Is it sit down on the moon?" said I. "Is it upon that little round thing then? Why then sure I'd fall off in a minute and be kilt and spilt and smashed all to bits. You're a vile deceiver, so you are." "Not at all, Dan," says he. "You can catch fast hold of the reaping hook that's sticking out of the side of the moon, and 'twill keep you up." "It won't then," said I. "Maybe not," said he, quite quiet. "If you don't, my man, I shall just give you a shake and one slap on my wing and send you down to the ground where every bone in your body will be smashed as small as a drop of dew on a cabbage leaf in the morning." "Why then I'm in a fine way," said I to myself, "ever to have come along with the likes of you." And so, giving him a hearty curse in Irish, for fear he'd know what I said, I got off his back with a heavy heart, took hold of the reaping hook, and sat down upon the moon, and a mighty cold seat it was, I can tell you that. When he had me there fairly landed, he turned about on me and said, "Good morning to you, Daniel O'Rourke," said he. "I think I've nicked you fairly now. You robbed my nest last year." 'Twas true enough for him, but how he found it out is hard enough to say. "And in return you're freely welcome to cool your heels dangling upon the moon like a cockthrow." Is that all, and is this how you leave me, you brute you, says I. You ugly unnatural baste, is this the way you serve me at last? Bad luck to yourself with your hooked nose, and to all your breed, you blackguard. 'Twas all no manner of use. He spread out his great big wings, burst out a-laughing, and flew away like lightning. I bawled after him to stop, but I might have called and bawled for ever without his minding me. Away he went, and I never saw him from that day to this, sorrow fly away with him. You may be sure I was in a disconsolate condition, and kept roaring out for the better grief, when all at once a door opened right in the middle of the moon, creaking on its hinges as if it had not been opened for a month before. I suppose they never thought of greasing him. And out there walks, who do you think, but the man in the moon himself. I knew him by his bush. "Good morrow to you, Daniel O'Rourke," says he. "How do you do?" "Very well, thank your honour," says I. "I hope your honour's well." "What brought you here, Dan?" says he. So I told him how I was a little overtaken in liquor at the master's, and how I was cast on a dissolute island, and how I lost my way in the bog, and the thief of an eagle promised to fly me out, and how, instead of that, he'd flown me up to the moon. "Dan," said the man in the moon, taking a pinch of snuff when I was done, "you must not stay here." "Indeed, sir," says I, "'tis much against my will that I'm here at all, but how am I to go back?" "That's your business," said he. "Dan, mine is to tell you that you must not stay, so be off in less than no time." "I'm doing no harm," said I, "only holding on hard by the reaping hook lest I fall off." "That's what you must not do, Dan," says he. "Pray, sir," says I, "may I ask how many you are in family, that you would not give a poor traveller lodging? I'm sure 'tis not often you're troubled with strangers coming to see you, for 'tis a long way." "I'm by myself, Dan," says he, "but you'd better let go the reaping hook." "Faith, and with your leave," says I, "I'll not let go the grip, and the more you bids me, the more it won't let go, so I will." "You had better, Dan," says he again. "Why then, my little fella," says I, taking the whole weight of him with my eye from head to foot, "there are 2 words to that bargain, and I'll not budge. You may, if you like." "We'll see how that is to be," says he, and back he went, giving the door such a great bang after him, for it was plain he was huffed, that I thought the moon and all would fall down with it. Well, I was preparing myself to try strength with him, when back he comes with the kitchen cleaver in his hand, and without saying a word he gives 2 bangs to the handle of the reaping hook that was holding me up, and whap, it came in 2. "Good morning to you, Dan," says the spiteful little blackguard when he saw me cleanly falling down with a bit of the handle in my hand. "I thank you for your visit, and fair weather after you, Daniel." I had no time to make my answer to him, for I was tumbling over and over and rolling at the rate of a fox hunt. "God help me," says I, "but this is a pretty pickle for a decent man to be seen in at this time of night. I'm now sold fairly." The word was not out of my mouth when, whiz, what should fly close by my ear but a flock of wild geese, all the way from my own bog of Ballyoshinog. How else should they know me? The old gander, who was their general, turning about his head, cried out to me, "Is that you, Dan?" "The same," said I, not a bit daunted now at what he said, for I was by this time used to all kind of bedevilment, and, besides, I knew him of old. "Good morrow to you," says he. "Daniel O'Rourke, how are you in health this morning?" "Very well, sir," says I. "Thank you kindly," drawing my breath, for I was mightily in want of some. "I hope your honour's the same." "I think 'tis fallen you are, Daniel," says he. "You may say that, sir," says I. "And where are you going all the way so fast?" said the gander. So I told him how I had taken the drop, and how I'd come on the island, and how I lost my way in the bog, and how the thief of an eagle flew me up to the moon, and how the man on the moon turned me out. "Dan," said he, "I'll save you. Put out your hand and catch me by the leg, and I'll fly you home." "Sweet is your hand in a pitcher of honey, my jewel," says I. Though all the time I thought within myself that I don't much trust you, but there was no help. So I caught the gander by the leg, and away I and the other geese flew after him as fast as hops. We flew and we flew and we flew until we came right over the wide ocean. I knew it well, for I saw Cape Clear to my right hand sticking up out of the water. My lord," says I to the goose, for I thought it best to keep a civil tongue in my head anyway, "fly to land, if you please." "It is impossible, you see, Dan," said he, "for a while, because, you see, we are going to Arabia." "To Arabia," said I. "That's surely some place in foreign parts, far away. Oh, Mr. Goose, why then, to be sure, I'm a man to be pitied among you." "Whist, you fool," said he. "Hold your tongue. I tell you Arabia is a very decent sort of place, as like West Carberry as one egg is like another, only there is a little more sand there." Just as we were talking, a ship hove in sight, sailing so beautiful before the wind. Then, sir," said I, "will you drop me on the ship, if you please?" "We're not fair over it," said he. "If I dropped you now, you would go splash into the sea." "I would not," says I. "I know better than that, for it is just clean under us, so let me drop now at once." "If you must, you must," said he. "There, take your own way." And he opened his claw, and faith, he was right. Sure enough, I came down plump into the very bottom of the salt sea. Down to the very bottom I went, and I gave myself up then forever, when a whale walked up to me, scratching himself after his night's sleep, and looked me full in the face, and never the word did he say, but, lifting up his tail, he splashed me all over again with the cold salt water, till there wasn't a dry stitch upon my whole carcass. And I heard somebody saying, 'twas a voice I know too, "Get up, you drunken brute, off with that." And with that I woke up, and there was Judy with a tub full of water, which she was splashing all over me, for, rest her soul, though she was a good wife, she could never bear to see me in drink, and had a bitter hand of her own. "Get up," said she again, "and of all places in the parish would no place serve your turn to lie down but under the old walls of Carrickpoka? An uneasy resting I'm sure you had of it." And sure enough I had, for I was fairly bothered out of my senses with eagles and men of the moons and flying ganders and whales driving me through bogs and up to the moon and down to the bottom of the green ocean. If I was in drink 10 times over, long would it be before I'd lie down in the same spot again, I know that. The best sentence in this story, for sure, is, "I think 'tis falling you are, Daniel," says he. This is a fantastic story in both senses of the words. Of course, it immediately reminds me of the stories of Baron Munchausen, with all their outrageous twists and turns and impossibilities. It also reminds me a lot of Alice in Wonderland, especially because no matter how unlikely the situation is, the conversation always starts with these pleasant formalities, as though you have to keep your manners even when you're falling through the air. It's one of Alice's most distinctive characteristics, and Daniel O'Rourke displays it perfectly here. This story is unfortunately sometimes cross-referenced as a story about the mythical Irish puka, and I am eager to eventually get some puka stories on this channel, but of course it isn't. It references Carrickpoka Castle, a 15th century castle located about halfway between Cork and Killarney in Ireland. Its name means Castle on the Rock of the Puka, sometimes also translated as fairy or spirit or ghost. While Daniel's home bog of Ballyashernaw doesn't seem to exist, there is a stream just under Carrickpoka Castle, and one could imagine that if he was headed home drunk and he started to cross at the ford, he fell into the water and then he somehow remained there under the walls of the castle rather than swimming away to the dissolute island. Just a quick note, the text does say dissolute. We are meant to understand that Daniel doesn't know the difference between dissolute and desolate, and it's intended to be funny. So anyway, the mention of the castle does place this story somewhere concrete, even though the story is, of course, completely fictional. And speaking of fiction, it's time to talk about Thomas Crofton Croker. So, between 1816 and 1818, the Brothers Grimm published nearly 600 German legends and folk tales. Those books were not an immediate commercial success, but they had an enormous influence over other amateur folklorist types in Europe who immediately went out and started gathering and writing their own folk tales. I'm going to kind of relate this story how I understand it and be a little bit generous to Mr. Croker. From the time he was a teenager, he was fascinated with Irish culture and folklore. From 1812 to 1815, he traveled around County Kerry and County Cork, where he was from, collecting legends and stories. Notably, his friends sometimes came with him on these field trips. In 1824, he published Researches on the South of Ireland, which was very well received. And then in 1825, the following year, he published Volume 1 of Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, and he published Volumes 2 and 3 in 1828. This book, Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, is by far his most famous work. It is the most influential, and it is the source of his fame and his legacy. After the book was published, several of his friends in the literary scene started talking. It seems that he had somehow lost his actual field notes, and he had reconstructed the stories in this book with the help of a bunch of his literary friends. Now, keep in mind that there was not a formal social science of anthropology at all at the time. I mean, this guy and his friends would later go on to excavate some Roman ruins in Kent and just collect the antiquities there. So his process would hardly be considered formal or rigorous by today's standards. But he was accused of modifying the stories to suit himself and of publishing stories that other people had written. These accusations went public and they ended up causing a lot of controversy. I also get the impression that Croker wasn't actually very well liked in Irish literary circles. He was short, he was under 4'11", and he was an Anglo-Irishman, probably a Protestant. He was a member of the gentry. He didn't speak Irish. He regarded the ancient Irish texts as old relics, and people felt like he portrayed the Irish peasants in a way that was kind of patronizing. For people like Yeats and for Douglas Hyde, for whom the folklore of Ireland is part of the art and culture and literature of a proud and noble people, they just hated him. Regarding this story in particular, in the original volume of Fairy Legends, this story was credited to writer William Maginn. After the book became popular and was reprinted, Croker put his own name on it, and for sure he always kept all the money from all of the books. After Maginn's death, his family complained that he had actually written Daniel O'Rourke and 3 other stories in that book. And Croker claimed that he had the original manuscript from which the book was published, and in the original manuscript, this story, Daniel O'Rourke, was in the handwriting of Croker's childhood friend Joseph Humphreys, and then there had been some notes and touch-ups by Maginn, and then Croker himself was the final editor and polished everything before it went to print. In 1926, Croker also adapted this piece into a stage play where it was moderately successful. I think it would be an amazing play, actually. Croker would never really live down the accusations of being a plagiarist and a poser. In later editions of the Fairy Legends, he cut the 10 most contested stories. In editions that were released after his death, his son wrote a preface defending him, and many other people, by the way, have defended him. To be honest, the practice of taking a story or a piece of folklore that was heard verbally and then revising it to make it more interesting or make a better story and combining it with a few other things and then taking credit for it was just what people did at the time. It's almost exactly what the Brothers Grimm did in Germany. I think it became controversial for Croker because he wasn't well liked and because other people felt that they were more Irish than he was and therefore more entitled to the literary legacy of Ireland. He did document some interesting and important customs and make lasting contributions to the study of some aspects of Irish culture. And look, I'm not here to judge who has the legitimate claim to this story, but of course I don't want to offend haters of T. Crofton Croker. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. This week's confession is that I'm just right now, actually at this moment, reconsidering the other story I have all ready to go for this week, because I just remembered that that story also has slightly problematic attribution and issues around sourcing, and I don't want to do two of those back to back. It's a bit annoying because, of course, I start by reading the stories and I get all interested in the story and get caught up in what it's going to be like to record them and what they're going to sound like, and then I go research the author, and sometimes I find things that I don't feel very good about. And of course, I think it's absolutely realistic to make some concessions for the moral or academic standards at the time and what was considered normal back then. But also, a lot of time we're talking about groups of people that I am not a member of, and I can't speak for how they want to be represented in literature or what they're willing to accept from old dead white people. I also have to be willing to, be the voice of that sentiment or give credit to that person, and I don't always want to do that. I do think history could be a bit more generous to Croker here because he really wasn't the worst of them. And also, he was really young when all of this went down. He was doing all of his field work and research when he was a teenager, although he did sell out his friends and steal their work as an adult. There is a balance somewhere, and I do keep trying to find it. If you like weird old stories with suspect sources, you have come to the right place. This is Restored Lore, where I find old, odd, obscure stories, and I share them with you every week. Please subscribe to the channel and opt into notifications so you never miss a story. Please also like this video and drop me a comment down below. It really does help boost the channel. Thank you so much for all the support, and I will see you next week.